Welcome back. This is Exopolitics Radio, a weekly magazine format public affairs program on exopolitics, the new political science of outer space, the science of relations between our human civilization and other intelligent civilizations in the multiverse. Exopoliticsradio.org is listener-sponsored, and we welcome your monthly or sustaining contributions at the donate button at www.exopoliticsradio.org. Our audio archives are free and open as a service to the public 24/7 at exopoliticsradio.org. Exopolitics Radio is broadcast weekly on our affiliates, which include exopoliticsradio.org, UFO Paranormal Radio Network, with over 3.8 million listeners per week in 104 countries and 309 U.S. cities, Revere Radio Network, and Kansas City Online Radio Network. Listen to Exopolitics Radio on iTunes and RSS feeds throughout cyberspace. I'm your host, Alfred Lambermont Weber. Well, we're back this week with part 2 of our feature interview with Joseph Montaldo, International Director of the International Community for Abduction Research, ICAR, whose website is at www.icar1.com, I believe. And my commentary, that is the Exopolitics Radio official commentary this week, in between the two programs, is really to sit back and reflect on what I call the cognitive dissonance that one of ICAR's main research findings, that approximately 1 billion human beings have been abducted by a hyperdimensional civilization, is engendering in people who come across that particular headline and that fact. And that is, we are finding the same sort of gatekeeping that goes on in other sort of paradigm-shattering research areas, such as the discovery of life on Mars in NASA rover photographs. And that is that, number one, gatekeepers, intellectual gatekeepers, come to the fore and dismiss the data without even listening to the radio interview with Joseph Montaldo. Secondly, there's this spreading around of this kind of dissing of the data without even listening. Thirdly, on a positive note, it seems that this research and this information really strengthens the connection of sincere and objective researchers in the field. That is, those who aren't led by either belief systems or need for some sort of gatekeeper connection, or even some military intelligence agenda, as an asset. Asset is different from agent. So that for us was one of the major findings which came out of our airing of the first segment. We were even contacted by people that said, stop broadcasting this research. And that's the same reaction that we've gotten from when we broadcast the original research of Andrew D. Basiago on the discovery of life on Mars, uncovering a NASA cover-up. And incidentally, will be a feature presenter, both Mr. Basiago and myself, a 90-minute PowerPoint at the ConspiracyCon conference in Santa Clara, California, at the Santa Clara Marriott on the weekend of Saturday, June 6th and Sunday, June 7th, 2009. This program airs slightly early because we're leaving for that conference. So even at the same time that this research information is being presented in major arenas, all the different layers and stratifications of gatekeepers and the general paradigms of conventional science come forth to try and block the information. But to me, it's astounding to get a headline which reads, ICAR research estimates that 1 billion persons may be being abducted by a hyperdimensional civilization, and that's empirically based. It's not a science fiction story. Now, the other major point that seems to come up is that the reaction is, well, these amphibian reptilians and the Greys are all consuming, i.e., they consume our entire reality. That's not necessarily true, and that's where the models and the hypotheses, we have to really understand that what are being put forth in this area are working hypotheses based on data. And the hypotheses in Laura Knight Jadzik's work in the area, which states that we have parallel universes in effect, or hyperdimensional universes. We're in a kind of a third dimension, third density universe. There's a fourth density universe, and a reptilian civilization occupies that in our kind of contiguous area, or interface with that universe, which has particular goals of its own. That doesn't mean that's all we are, because we're in a complex multidimensional system, and in our reincarnation, apparent reincarnation cycle, and we'll be having experts on reincarnation from a scientific point of view later on in the Exopolitics radio season. My understanding is that the late Professor John Mack of Harvard was involved in afterlife research shortly before he was killed. So this is an area in which there's an interface between exopolitics and the dimensional ecology in which we live. We also, there's sixth density upper dimensional extraterrestrials, which we have stated are the extraterrestrial civilizations with whom humanity should be making strategic alliances, along obviously with the Martians, who are in the third density along with ourselves and are more advanced and are peaceful by all of the data. Just because there's research showing that a billion persons have been abducted does not mean that that's our sole reality. We're inside of a dimensional ecology, and the upper dimensionals, according to some models, say, well, the reptilian agenda is not going to succeed. And there are different nuances here, but one cannot run away from this empirical data. One cannot run away from the empirical data of abduction research. And that is what the gatekeepers, be they military intelligence assets, be they trying to preserve some sort of professional position, be they just, out of a reactive mind, that is, running away from the data, which tends to be the case in abduction research. I'm finding people just don't want to look at the empirical data of abduction research in order to form hypotheses about the reality in which we live. Well, if we want to be truth-based and reality-based, one has to include this data. And so these are two landmark It's a landmark, exclusive interviews of historic importance, in my estimation, with Joseph Montaldo, International Director for the International Director for the International Community of Abduction Research, ICAR. This is Exopolitics Radio. I'm your host, Alfred Weber. Please stay tuned. Thank you. This is a reading from Exopolitics, Politics, Government, and Law in the Universe, a book by Alfred Lambermont Weber. Chapter 1, Introduction to Exopolitics, the Exopolitics Model. Is there intelligent life elsewhere in the universe? Exopolitics as a discipline for understanding universe society through its politics and government may turn our dominant view of the universe upside down. Exopolitics posits that the truest conception of our earthly circumstance may be that we are on an isolated planet in the midst of a populated, evolving, highly organized, interplanetary, intergalactic, multidimensional universe society. End of quote. You can support the cause of exopolitics and the development of your own mind and being, an expansion into this new vision of an upper dimensional society on Earth by reading the book Exopolitics, which you can purchase at www.exopolitics.com, at amazon.com, or at any local bookstore by ordering it through Baker & Taylor, their wholesale distributor. We at Exopolitics Radio are happy to announce that we have reached a settlement with one of the major infringers who had published Exopolitics, the book, online in a pirated edition. This had deprived Exopolitics Radio from almost $30,000 in funds that we could have used for public events and for other areas of promoting and fighting for extraterrestrial disclosure. Now that these pirated editions have been taken off of the internet, we urge you to consider buying Exopolitics, the book, and getting into it as a primal source for the 21st century. Thank you and have a wonderful day. Welcome back. This is Exopolitics Radio. I'm your host, Alfred Weber, and we're today in part 2 of our feature interview with Joseph Montaldo, co-founder, international director, and spokesperson for ICAR, the International Community for Alien Research, at www.icar1, that's the numeral 1.com, www.icar.com. And for those of you who listened last week, if you haven't, I urge you to go back to that program and that segment. What I would call very substantial and important potential hypotheses about the abduction phenomenon and its exopolitical implications, starting with a number that seems to be a consensus number among abduction researchers, that there are 1 billion persons out of our population, about 20%, who have been abducted, and then that there are fairly profound possible scenarios from an abduction research technique of pre-programming contactees and actually dialoguing with the Greys and with the reptilians. And there have been uniform answers that come back that the blue plasma that is seen is actually food for the Greys, but also fuel for the Grey spacecraft. And then in kind of a higher order exopolitical potential scenarios, a Holocaust dream that about 1/3 of humans may survive what will be a pandemic released on the planet. The contactees, that is the 1/3 who have been abducted, may be immune to this pandemic. Two-thirds of the population dying, and two scenarios going on in terms of a colonization of Earth with about 1/3 of the humans remaining, perhaps the reptilians here, and within other dimensional places or off Earth, a kind of a more advanced scenario where human consciousnesses are reimplanted in advanced, upgraded human bodies that last as long as the Greys. Have I summarized that well,
you
Joe?
Summarized it excellently. Quick story, and then I'll shut up for a second. On the alien agenda thing, I introduced that 7 years ago when I first started hosting Wake Up USA. That's the agenda that got my life and my family's life threatened. That's the one they told me not to talk about ever again. Matter of fact, Alfred, last week was the first time I mentioned that since that show on the air.
Now, if I might, and that is that prior to this program, we were talking, and you have in fact interviewed a very interesting author, Laura Jazik, who is author of a book, High Strangeness, Hyperdimensions in the Process of Alien Abduction, with a preface by Richard M. Dolan, author of UFOs and the National Security State. And I featured Laura Jazik's book on a couple of articles in the Examiner, which were highly controversial in the public realm. And I wondered if, of course, I haven't had the opportunity to listen to your interviews with Laura, but do they present a model? Her information is derived from a so-called sixth-density source that is giving information as to what the reptilian and Grey agendas are. There's some slight differences with the empirical data that you've derived through your method. And I wondered if you could talk a bit about what you found from what Laura Jazik says and how that squares with your data.
Actually, we didn't get to that part in the interview, but she is coming back to talk about that. What we did talk about the reptilians now, there's actually several points that we agree on. When I was talking with her, we agreed on. There was a lot of controversy with Laura Yachik before I did this interview. There was a lot of controversy on the internet and a lot of other places, and I was under the impression that she was a much different person than she actually was. She's a very nice, very articulate lady, and I talked with her for 2 hours, and it was a very good interview. And there are some key points we agree on, but we both agreed what we would do. We're going to do another interview in the near future. But she has invited myself and a few others to come spend a little time with her, about a week over in France, where we can all sit down and compare notes, compare data, and what we're going to probably do is end up releasing a video about it. We're going to probably do a combined thing and on the alike notes, what's close together, what's the same, and what may be different. And like I was telling her, it's hard when you're one person or you're one type of contact. Now, she outright admitted she's not a contactee. She said it clearly. She is not a contactee. Her evidence has been found through using tools. Now, I know she picked a bad word when she said that channeling word because everybody freaks out about the channeling word. And it probably was a bad word for her to use, but she explained to me what she's doing. She is using a type of board. It's not exactly a Ouija board. It's a little different, but she's using a tool, and she's letting them use the tool to give her the information on the question she's asking. It would be the same as if you used a Ouija board, or if you used a scurrying bowl, or if you used tarot cards, or any of those things. So I wanted to clarify for people, because I know a lot of people are having problems with the way she got to her information. It's not quite as controversial as everybody thought it was. And after I talked to her, I realized that, because, what I was told the other day by, I'm not going to mention their name, was that, well, we won't even get into it. It was just a crazy story they told me, and it turned out to be something much entirely different. And she said there's definitely room in there for mistakes. There's definitely room in there that, it might be some falsehoods and stuff like that. So she's willing to entertain the idea that not everything she was told is correct, and some of the stuff may be different. And using what her and I were talking about today, data-wise, or the other day, data-wise, I think you might see her actually change a few things.
Right.
Over the next couple of months, I think you're going to see a few things change, and I may even change a few things. You never know. You never know what's going to come out of these different meetings we have with different information sources. Because, like I said, she's not a contactee, but she is an experience in the fact that she's seen a UFO, and she's an experience in the fact that she's found a way that she says she has found a way to access data from a different dimension. Now, whether or not that's true or not, until I see it for myself, I won't actually be able to make that determination. I can tell you, though, she's not a crazy whack job that people were saying she was. She's like I said earlier, she's very polite, she's very nice, she's very articulate. She knows her physics pretty well, she knows her science pretty well, and she's looking for answers just like the rest of us are.
Yeah, well, that certainly was my impression from reading her book.
Yeah.
And in fact, from Richard Dolan's preface of the book.
That amazed me, by the way. I am. That's the whole reason I wanted to interview her. Is I've never heard Richard endorse anyone like that before, and that took me back. I'm like, well, I've got to talk to this woman. I said, if Richard really says she's this good, I got to talk to her. And I was quite pleasantly surprised by it.
Well, yeah. Now, what comes out of her book, and to the extent that I would call it not empirical from the scientific method, but rather using what I think her husband calls scientific channeling, or some phrase like that. With the data that ICAR and you have been able to develop using this methodology of pre-programming contactees, and then actually deriving information from the answers that the gray and reptilian abductors give. First of all, let me say that from an exopolitical standpoint, I mean, one is almost aghast as to the gap between what consensual reality is and with what, if it is true, what this information about the forthcoming annihilation of 2/3 of humans and the creation of other ultradimensional worlds is. And I wondered, in your research, have you come across any involvement of the U.S. government and or paragovernmental groups?
Most definitely.
In this information, and how?
Well, to make a long story short, one of the things that made me realize that government was abducting people or getting involved was the Betty and Barney Hill case. That was one of the first keys to me that there was military involvement in abductions, not just alien. And the military has an advance. To make a long story short about Betty and Barney Hill, guys, if you've ever heard the regression tapes, you'll notice that they describe a hospital room and all the technologies used in an abduction were terrestrial-based technologies. That lets you know that it's a military abduction. The actual alien abduction of Betty and Barney Hill happened in Canada. There was a military abduction in New Hampshire that was not an alien abduction. And so, because I don't want to get into this because Alfred would take up too much time, but when I was in D.C. with Alfred just recently at the X conference, you can hear my lecture on MilLabs right there. It's the whole thing for military abductions is listed right there. But the thing of it is we learned early on, because that's what made me start looking into it, the Betty and Barney Hill case. When I started reviewing my own contactee groups and asking them specific questions, we found out that probably 8 to 12% of our contactees had military abductions. Also, and this is really important for the listening audience, every famous contactee has had a military abduction. Without any, there's no exceptions to this rule. Jim Sparks has, Katarina Wilson has, Leah Haley has, Marion Delicato has, Leah Isley has, the whole bunch of them. There's no exception. And there's another little key. Out of 8 of the 7 people I just mentioned, including Yachik, have had experiences near Gulf Breeze, Florida, and which I find odd since all these women live in different places, and around the world and around the country, that they've all had, including my wife and myself, have had experiences in this same area of Gulf Breeze, near Eglin Air Force Base.
Now, what is the purpose of these military abductions, MyLabs, and how do they relate to both the alien abductions and the alien agenda?
Well, there seems to be a couple of things going on. One, they seem to be trying to find out how more advanced the psychic abilities are of the contactees. They may even be looking for remote viewers through the contactee groups. They're also looking to find out about different types of technologies. As my good friend Melinda Leslie tells me all the time, they're reverse engineering contactees is what they're doing. They're taking them and looking at them and trying to find out what happened to them on the ship, what information they have about the alien agenda, what type of psychic abilities they may have, what type of physical abilities they may have, and what kind of technologies on board the craft have they been exposed to. What most Americans don't realize, and I think the rest of the world realizes it a little better, but most Americans don't realize is the government doesn't know much more than the average researcher does. They may know a little bit more about the physical technologies, but as far as why the aliens are here, how they do stuff, and how they conduct themselves, the government doesn't know any more than we do. And that's one of the reasons they're looking, and they look on a regular basis. They're abducting contactees on a regular basis. Of course, the more famous ones, there's 2 reasons they like the famous ones. One, they're famous and they know who you are, okay? Like Katarina Wilson, she's very popular. A lot of people know who she is, so the government says, well, look, there's a one right there. Plus, the communicators, as they call themselves, have more substantial information. It's not always correct, but they have way more information than the average everyday contactee does. The average contactee may remember 5% of their abduction. Most abductees will never remember more than 1 or 2%, and most of them will never, let me rephrase that, most abductees will never remember anything. The ones that do remember abductees we're talking about is about 5%, maybe 2 to 5%. Contactees will never know more than about 10% unless they happen to be a keeper or a communicator like Kat and them are, and then they'll know probably 50, 60% of what's going on.
Right. Now, just to ask you this, to begin to zero in on it, are the governments concerned about the research that 2/3 of humanity may be killed in a pandemic, and are they concerned about the abduction phenomenon, or are they hiding it from the public?
Well, they're hiding it from the public, but they're hiding it from the public because they're looking for, I really think that as far as like the pandemic thing goes, I think the government's already fully and functionally aware of it, and I think they're already working on a way to use the contactees to inoculate whoever they want to keep. I don't know how they're doing it or even how they're analyzing what our blood is, but I think they're looking because I think they know the contactees are immune, and I think they're looking for a way to use it for themselves. Because one of the things they talk about, the Greys talk about, is that some of the contactees serve as like finders. They go out and find people. When this all happens and all this goes down, there'll be spots where the aliens will come to meet different groups, and some of these keepers will actually be out there finding groups of contactees and making sure they get to wherever they belong. Any colonists that are leaving the planet will be escorted by somebody on the planet, so there'll be some left behind, some taken, and I imagine the military is going to be involved in that up to their ears. So these guys' jobs will probably be to keep the average abductee or contactee away from the military, help them to get to wherever they need to be, and put on board the ships. But the government has a vested interest in this. I mean, they know about the pandemic, so they're looking to find a cure for themselves. And by the way, they're not looking to cure the general population. Now, there is an argument that somebody might be because of chemtrails. Somebody was telling me, a friend of mine who works in the government was telling me that was a form of aerial inoculation. And it's a way they've been testing for a decade now on how, because it started all with chicken pox. They were looking for a way to do mass inoculations because they knew if there was ever an epidemic in our country, a pandemic, that the hospitals couldn't respond to it well enough. So they were looking for a way to inoculate people without actually having to get on the ground and be contaminated. So aerial inoculation came into being about 12, 14 years ago, and they've been working on it ever since. So I don't know if that is for what they're talking about with the aliens, or if they're just worried about if there's a mass virus gets loose on the planet now, or what it's about. But they're definitely working on it. It's not even a covert project anymore. It's actually, you can actually find it on one of the military sites.
Now, to go back to Laura Jazzik's hypothesis for a moment, which comes from its alleged sixth-density source of a higher upper dimensional extraterrestrial source or interdimensional source. What she sets out is a model whereby we're in what's called the third density, and basically that's a dimension that's ruled by time, i.e. we sort of go through experience of time, and that's how we learn whatever lessons we have to. There's a density immediately adjacent to the third density called the fourth density, in which time, apparently beings in the fourth density have much more free access to time. And according to this model, the Earth is now moving up into the fourth density, and humans are actually graduating to go into the fourth density, so that we'll be much more telepathic. We just have to think of things and it will manifest, and this type of thing. But the point being, with regards to the reptilians, is that according to her model and her source, the reptilians that exist now in the fourth density are actually inimical to humanity. And the purpose of the abduction program is to create new hybrid vessels into which the consciousnesses of the reptilians will incarnate, and that our community of human souls, our human community of souls, will be displaced on this planet by a new type of human that's actually a reptilian human, i.e. a vessel for this reptilian group of souls, and that, according to them, the Greys are sort of the facilitators in the third density of this, and that the abduction phenomenon has to do with preparing for a wholesale, I think they call it in that book, incarnational takeover. How do you evaluate that in light of your data?
Well, I really,
in terms of the intentions of the reptilians and the Greys.
Well, in some places, I think they're right in what they're talking about, but I think because of the way they're getting their data, there may be some discrepancies and some mistakes. I'll give you an example. I have had more than 1,000 contactees talk about host bodies. When they're on ships, they'll say there's rows and rows and rows of bodies just stacked up on these ships, whether it's gray ships, human ships, or reptilian ships. They have these rows and rows of bodies, right? Well, what was funny about this is a couple of the contactees had gotten close enough to see the bodies. They seen their self and their families there, like their daughters, their sons, their children, their own self. So they were actually looking at their self while they were standing there. The only thing they said different was the body. The head was a little shaped, a little bit different, and the body was a little bit more heavy set, like it was going to be in a heavier gravity environment. And come to find out, when we actually put this to task, when we actually asked the aliens about this, they said the host bodies were being designed so that they could download human consciousness straight into the host bodies. Now, there's another little kicker to this. A lot of UFO sightings have been sighted over mortuaries and graveyards. For a long time, we couldn't figure out what the hell is a UFO doing over a graveyard or a mortuary. Now we know. They were uploading the consciousness from the deceased body into the new body, is what they were doing. Those bodies are going off-world to the new colony. And this is another thing that's interesting. We've had more than 500 people describe this colony. They describe it as a planet about twice the size of Earth, with one body of water completely ringing the equator, with regular rivers and all, but it's like one big ocean. and it's a 2G environment. It's not a 1G environment. It's a 2G environment. So our bodies are going to be a little bit stockier and a little bit tougher than they are now because it's a more gravitational field on the body. All these contactees describe this. They all describe this. All the colonists or the ones that have been on these ships describe this identically. So I think what happened with Laura is the reptilians are definitely involved, and reptilians definitely want their planet back. They are willing to let some humans stay and have colonies on the planet, but they definitely want their planet back. So I think she's right in that fact. I think she just mistook who was actually getting the new bodies. And it's not to say that some of the reptilians may not get new bodies, but I need to clarify something anyway. They're not reptilians, they're amphibians. This is how we know they were native to Earth. They are actually amphibians. They look like lizards, but they're amphibians. They live in the water. They're warm-blooded. They can breathe both in the atmosphere and in the ocean. Now, let's be honest about this. If you were going to be the most dominant life form on planet Earth, you would be able to use the oceans. Man can't even hardly swim. Man can't even go much below 100 feet without doing damage to his body. The reptilians can swim all over the place. They can live in the water, out the water. They can live in cold climate, warm climate. It doesn't matter. They are much more suited to be on this planet than we are. And here's another little tidbit for some of my friends out there listening. The average body clock of a human is set to 24 and a quarter hour days. This planet we live on has a 23 and 3/4 hour day, which suggests that we are not native to this planet. It also suggests that the average human body temperature is, I think it's the best environment for the human to live in is 76 degrees Fahrenheit. The average temperature on this planet is 86 degrees Fahrenheit. But they do believe 53 million years ago, the average temperature on Mars was about 74 degrees, and Mars has a 24 and a quarter hour day. So now this is all speculation, ladies and gentlemen, but it sounds like the bodies that we have today were more suited to live in that environment than they are in this environment. And Mars would have been 3/4 land, 1/4 water. So the dominant life form there would have been bred to live on the land. The dominant life form on Earth should have been bred to live in the water, which is what the amphibians do. They have underwater cities. They use the land, too, but they can live in both places. We can't. So
now, do you see, though, from your data, and this is an essential point that I think is very important, what the JASIC data says is that the reptilians are hostile and inimical. They're kind of an evil force. She uses the word evil.
Yeah, she does. Yeah,
and I don't get that same feeling from your data that this is not evil, but it's a biological imperative.
Well, it is a kind of biological imperative, and you can use the word evil in the fact that they're going to wipe out 2/3 of the population. So, in that aspect, are evil. But by their own admittance and by the contactees' own admittance, they are willing to live and work with humans. They just know, because judging by our own behavior, that they can't come into a world with 6 billion humans on it, and actually this is supposed to be around when we have 9 or 10 billion humans. They're not going to be accepted on this planet, and there's going to be problems. The humans are going to try to kill them, they're going to be hostile to them, and then there's going to start a war. So they're figuring just nip all that in the bud early on. Contactees are much more open-minded, much more laid back. All contactees, the only thing we found that all contactees have in common is they're born survivors. They're naturally born survivors. So you have a group of people who are more open-minded, have much better telepathic abilities, and they're born survivors. So they would have a much easier time adapting to living with an alien race than most of the people today. Because let's be honest, Alfred, most people can't even get along because of color or sex, much less if we start introducing reptilians into the theme. Maybe the rest of us will get along then, but we'll just hate on the reptilians. It's like, first we hated on the Indians, then we hated on the black man, then we hated on the Chinese, and now we're all kind of hating on each other. But, humans have issues with getting along with each other. So, there's just no hope, judged by our own actions. There's just no hope to introduce our amphibian reptilian race to our society and expect everyone to get along. And they know that. So they don't want to wipe us out. They don't. Somehow or another, we're related to them. If you believe what the Sumerians write, the reptilians are what made us sentient. If you actually go back to the Sumerian text, the Sumerians talk about the human aliens that came here a long time ago, built 2 great white dome cities, couldn't breathe the air, couldn't go outside the dome, so they created a race to mine and work on the planet. That race decided, because they were so much like the first race, that they were going to create a subservient race, and that's what they did. And if you remember all your ancient history, including the Christian Bible, the first breed of man was not very bright. He could do stuff like name the animals and procreate, but he was not self-aware. He did not ask why he had to plow the field. He agreed with everything he was told. Well, there's a bunch of stories in both the Egyptians, the Sumerians, the Mayans, the Incans, the Aztecs, the Dogon, where an amphibian reptilian race came in, used to take their women, rape their women, brought the women back. The children were born were different, but they didn't look different than man, but they acted different. They said, well, why am I supposed to plow the field? Why don't you go plow the damn field? Like in Adam and Eve's story, what was the first thing Eve did? She clothed herself because she was self-aware and she realized she was naked. She had became self-aware. So a lot of the ancient history gives the reptilians credit with making the human race self-aware. And remember, there is a reptilian section in the human brain.
Now, let's turn the conversation toward exopolitics.
Yeah.
And because I think that now we have a sufficient knowledge base. How can or what role should exopolitics, and by extension the disclosure movement, which seeks to have information about extraterrestrials or interdimensionals disclosed, what role should that movement have with the abduction research and with this reality, with this reality that you've put forth, which is radically different from any of the data that the current exopolitics community puts forth?
Yeah, well, because this data scares the daylights out of most of them. But see, we have more data than most. But you see, I tell them don't get scared because we have an opportunity here, and especially people like yourself, Stephen Bessette, Michael Sala, because y'all are very well respected in the community, and it gives y'all a venue now to discuss this with. We know what we should be preparing for. So for when we're talking about when some of this stuff starts coming down, exopolitics needs to be working towards figuring out a way that things that we want, when we want to deal with these aliens, things that the ones that survive need, things that they should have, interpretations on how we should be handled and treated. And the thing about it is if in cooperation with the exopolitics people and disclosure, if we could get disclosure early enough, we might be able to curtail this and not have to lose two-thirds of our population. Because if we could make humans understand earlier, and this should be exopolitics' main job, is making them understand that there is something coming. Whether I'm right or wrong, there is definitely something coming, and it's headed for us. And as it stands right now, 90% of the researchers agree it's not going to be pleasant. We need to make the humans understand, because if we can wake them up and make them understand there is strength in numbers, and I don't mean it because of a war, but I meant psychologically, mentally, spiritually, there is strength in numbers. And if we can show them that we can live together as a group, they may say, okay, well, we'll leave half of you here, and we'll give y'all half the planet, and the reptilians will take the other half the planet. We'll move the other half the planet off world, start a new colony, because then we'll have representation. Right now, nobody's being represented. The contactees not being represented anywhere in ufology, which they should be. Agendas are not being represented in ufology like they should be. And people like yourself and Michael and Stephen have the ability to represent the contactee, but you also have the ability to represent the different alien groups. Now that you're being informed on some of the stuff that's coming, you can say, okay, what can we do to prepare ourselves for this? And is there any way that we can maybe barter a deal or work something out where that we might be able to change these circumstances or even enhance these circumstances somewhat? And some very eloquent speakers, and I really think the only thing I worry about sometimes is if I drag y'all into this, the aliens might decide to come visit y'all.
Well, I mean, if welcome back, Joe. We were cut off right when you. Hello?
Yeah, I got you. I'm still.
Yeah, good. We were cut off right at a very important juncture. Let's kind of take this step by step.
Okay.
Let's look at the human governments first, because supposedly the human governments are tasked with looking out after the welfare of the population. Now, we know that might not be true, but let's take the U.S. government. its most salient task was in 1953 with the CIA's Robinson panel. It said that you can't have any discourse in civil society or in the media about the extraterrestrial presence, or we're going to destroy your career, your family. We're going to make sure that you're fired if you're a journalist or an academic. So how do you think right now the disclosure movement is focused on a very narrow set of facts and trying to take those narrow set of facts and have a government disclose? What you're describing, and it's empirically based, that's important, is a reality that's far vaster than that and in far different terms. You're talking about a sea change here. What should the disclosure movement and the exopolitical movement, where should its focus be, and how can it start telling this story?
Well, first off, I think a lot of this needs to be brought to the general public, but it needs to be included in a political fashion so that it's being brought to the general public, but it's being presented in a way that politicians can understand this. Because let's be honest, there's a special group that knows what's going on, but general politicians don't have a clue that any of this is going on. They're not being told any of this stuff. Obama probably doesn't even know about this stuff. And he probably won't ever be told unless there's a need to tell him. It's like Baby Bush. If they told Baby Bush his daddy told him, I don't think anybody else told him about it. Now, Bush Sr., he knew. I have no doubt that Bush Sr. knew. But as far as the rest of them, I don't even think they bother telling him. So, they need to be made to understand that these are things that are being picked up. The information is being given to us by contactees, yes, but it's the way we're retrieving it. It's being done in independent studies by independent investigators, by independent contactees. So you take 50, you make sure they don't know each other, they have no way to contact each other, and you have 10 of them each report back to a different investigator, and then they get together and compare everything they found in writing and go from there. And those kind of things are the things that the government needs to be aware of, because it's really what they're looking for in military abductions. That's what they're looking for. They're looking for this kind of information to find out where they should be moving and what steps they should be making. And I think by helping the government understand this and the general population, it may be a little bit easier to force disclosure, or it may give them a reason to disclose. If we can make them understand that there is truly a threat, and it's not just in our heads and it's not just anything else, if we can make them understand that there is truly a threat, then they may actually get more interested and more involved in what's going on.
So with the publication of your book this coming winter, and that is the Handbook of Alien Abductions,
yeah.
Are you designing that book so that it will be a database that the population can go to and begin to rely on, that governments can go to, that media can go to, and can refer to and say, look, there's this database that says that these hypotheses, which may seem fantastical and are going to change, it's like everything you know is wrong, right?
Yeah.
Is that the purpose of that book?
The book, it's what it's for. It's so that the average, everyday person can pick this book up and not have to do like I did and spend 25 years accumulating data. They can look in the book. It'll say, okay, what to expect from a gray. We'll describe there's 7 or 8 different types of gray. There's things you can expect from each different type of gray, what you can expect from birth to death and an alien abduction from the gray. We will also do that with the humans, the reptilians, the light beings, and the little brown guys will all be included in this. These are the 5 major races that we investigate, and we're going to tell you what you can expect from death to birth in these abductions, what we think parts of the alien agendas are, because we'll only go so far with the alien agendas because we always get threatened about it, so we kind of stay out of it a lot. But, the thing about it is that's what it's for. And eventually, once the book's been out for a year or two, they're actually putting together a public iCard database. The biggest problem for this is taking the time to remove all names, all references to places, and all addresses, phone number. It's a lot of work. We thought we could do this quickly. This is going to be a monumental undertaking. And so, probably 2-3 years down the line, there'll actually be a database where they can actually go look and see what the book was based on.
Well, now
there won't be any names or phone numbers or addresses.
Sure.
But the original reports will be there.
Now, for example, some of the work that we do as exopolitical people is that, and I think you were there at the press conference at the National Press Club, where we have an ongoing project with the United Nations to have the UN General Assembly implement Resolution 33426, the decision 33426, adopted in 1978, which essentially sets up a UN Department of Extraterrestrial Affairs.
And they need one.
And we've had conversations with the Chief of Cabinet of the UN, with the President of the UN General Assembly, and with high-ranking Secretariat officials, that they've said, look, you just bring to us one member nation, and we will, that will introduce the resolution, and it will happen. Okay? So I'm hearing what you're saying, Joe, and I'm asking you, will you join our project, join with our project, and help us so we can begin to talk to UN member nations and give them the data that you have and the picture that you have?
Oh, yeah, I will.
Yeah, good.
I support Exopolitics 100%. Anybody who's listened to me for any length of time knows that. I'm not like the other, and I don't know why some of these other abduction researchers give y'all a hard time, because, whether or not abductions have been included in this or not, what y'all been doing is there's been a place for what y'all been doing since y'all started it. So I never did understand the problem they had.
Yeah.
But there's no.
No, right. But I mean, what we're doing is we're opening up channels within the governmental framework and within the framework of international law, within which to bring data. I've always been kind of upset that the data then that we would bring is kind of weak. It's not really what's happening. And it seems to me, from what I've read, and I've read some of the major works, and now from the data that you've summarized in these two programs, and we're looking forward to your book, that you would be the person to sit down at the table.
Actually, I would love to. I would help any way I could. I think this is important. I've been an avid supporter of X Conference since it started. I endorse y'all anytime I can, get y'all any help that I can. That's why I tell Stephen and yourself and even Michael, I said, any airtime that y'all need, anything that I can do to help. That is what the ICAR organization and the radio network was founded for, is to help get the truth out, not just my truth, but everybody's truth out. And that's what we do. I mean, that's what we're about.
Because what seems to me vital now is to form channels of communication to those institutions of mainstream humanity, be it the governments, be it the media, and to the public, and in ways that we don't get reactive blowback. See, that's because the reality that comes forth in your hypotheses, and I'm going to use that language, is such a sea change from what the normal human culture has, that, I mean, what a task it's going to be to bring this to a human audience and have them even comprehend it.
Yes, it is. It's going to be tough. And something else that's interesting, Alfred, is one of the studies we did on the amphibian reptilians about 5 years ago suggested that they would be willing to sit down and work through this with us. It's not they're not near as vicious as everybody thinks they are. It's not that they're all sweet and nice, because they're not, but they're not near as vicious as everybody thinks to. And they really, out of all the races visiting this planet, they're the closest one to us in build and attitude. They even have religion. So in reality, they're the closest to us out of all the races visiting. And they would rather not wipe out 2/3 of our population, but they're going to do whatever it is that they need to do to survive, just like we do every day. And it's important to make people understand this. And I really think, just like there was changes in contact over the last 15 years, if this was handled correctly and the right people were speaking about it and the right people were getting interested, I really think you could probably work a deal with the amphibian reptilians to maybe change this outcome, at least somewhat.
Yeah, and that's, come to think about it, that's the way that Jim Sparks, who you mentioned as a keeper, really ends his book after that circle with the reptilians and the Greys. And they're communicating a very positive message. And you're communicating, in a way, a positive message now, and a very vital and important one. We have come so quickly to the end of this segment that we want to invite you in the future, Joe, as our guest, to really keep us apprised of what's happening in this very, very important arena.
Anytime you want me on, just call me, Alfred. Let me know. I love being on the show. I love talking to you. You're an easy person to talk to. In case y'all didn't know, ladies and gentlemen, poor Alfred had to listen to me for, about an hour and a half when we drove back from D.C.
It was good.
That was fun.
It was good. No, but then, you see, this is what we should be talking about on the Coast to Coast, because we were on Coast to Coast for two hours, right, at the X conference?
Yeah, at the X conference.
But these hypotheses and this research and this scenario, which I think, if true, it is the priority exopolitical task. And that's the level of communication that we should have to these audiences with this specific data showing the scientific rigor and the methodology that you've developed it. And I really want to commend your work and honor that as a service to humanity and to all of the residents of this world.
No, I appreciate it, and I'm pretty sure George would let us on to come talk about this. I don't think he'd have any problem with it at all.
Good.
Every time I've talked to anybody over the coast, they've been very receptive. And I was asked how come I'm not on Coast more often, because I'm like, well, because I only want to come on when I got something to say.
Yeah. But what you have shared today, I think, is a profound message, and I certainly want to thank you for it. We have come to the end of this segment. We've been with Joseph Montaldo, who is co-founder, international director, and spokesperson for ICAR, the International Community for Alien Research. You can reach them at www.icar1.com. And, of course, I want to get this right. It's paranormalradionetwork.com.
.org, yeah.
.org. You can hear Joe's show at paranormalradionetwork.org, and you can also listen to Exopolitics Radio there.
Yes, you can. And what the book Alfred I was talking about, there's the 20 of the 40 hours that are going in this book is posted on that site, so y'all can get an idea, heads up, what's going to be in there ahead of time.
Excellent. Good. Well, we look forward to having you on Exopolitics Radio as this story unfolds in the future. We've been with Joseph Montaldo of the International Community for Alien Research. This is Exopolitics Radio. I'm your host, Alfred Weber. Please stay tuned. Thank you.
Well, this has been another broad brush program. Certainly Joseph Montaldo's two-part interview, the second part going for 45 minutes, is historic. It's a real breakthrough into the exopolitical community and into the framework of exopolitics. And that is one can no longer ignore the elephant in the room. In other words, the empirical data of abduction research has to be accounted for, and it's the science of exopolitics, the science of relations between our human civilization and other intelligent civilizations in the multiverse, the hyperdimensional civilization of apparent amphibians, reptilians, and their cybernetic clones, the Greys, apparently being qualifying within this overall definition of Exopolitics Radio. So our goal in presenting this groundbreaking information is to begin to bring it and surface it within the kind of the framework and the interface that exopolitics as a science provides into the mainstream of human thought. And that has been the goal. And we urge those of you who are listening to this program to take some time, perhaps to re-listen to it, to listen to the 20 to 40 programs that Mr. Montaldo refers to on the with regard to the ICAR data, and certainly to begin to read their forthcoming book, the handbook for abduction research, which will be coming out toward the end of 2009, so that we can begin to surface this data into the mainstream and make sense of it as we go further into solar cycle 24. This is Exopolitics Radio. I'm your host, Alfred Weber, wishing you a wonderful, miracle-filled, and abduction research encompassing inside your paradigm day, week, and life. Thank you.